Um, well, yeah, I joined the Guild about a year ago. I did move from Florida, um, which seems to be a fortuitous thing. Seems like Oregon is a little safer than Florida right now. For me, anyway. I'm 70 plus years old. Um, we had talked a little bit, me and Larry, about different things that we might be able to do with this. And one of the skills, I guess, that I've acquired over the years is sketching. Actually, I started drawing, doodling, right, when I was a kid, and have just kept it up since then. And I've done watercolor and oils and acrylics and charcoal and graphite, and I, I I will paint anything. One of my first big paintings was a funny looking purple ape on the side of it. At the time, this was years ago. This is an odd story that you could buy anything from a pet shop. So I bought an owl monkey from South America for my girlfriend at the time. I don't know why I thought she wanted a monkey, but I did. So I painted a big purple ape on the side of the cage I built for the owl. It was a woodworking project and a painting project and a drawing project and a natural science project all at once. That has nothing to do with what I'm going to teach you. It's not teaching. What I'm going to try to show you and talk about a little bit is sketching. I think sketching is real important to any artistic endeavor, to any building endeavor. I mean, we're woodworkers too, and it's so nice to be able to sketch something quickly to show somebody a design of a chair, a table, or a cabinet that they might be looking for. An easy way to get the right idea before you build the wrong thing, right? Okay, so with that, I guess I'll start. I'm going to do a little bit of a presentation, very little, just a couple of screens to tell you what I'm going to talk about. And then I'm going to do mostly demonstrations, I hope. We'll see how this camera. Um, I will try to stop every little bit after I've covered. I have a bunch of mini demos. After I've covered something, I'll stop and ask if there are any questions. So what are we going to do? I'm talking about sketching. If you don't want to listen, or if you think you're way past a basic drawing skill, then I guess you can go drink a beer or have a cup of tea or coffee. So I'll talk about materials first. It really is basic. Materials are really neat in sketching, I think, because, well, I have a lot of hobbies, and most of my hobbies are not cheap. But sketching, fortunately, is relatively inexpensive. We're talking about erasers and pencils and things like that, so, and sketch pads. Not a huge expenditure normally. And we'll talk about holding the pencil, or whatever you happen to be sketching with. If that's a piece of charcoal or anything else. And maybe that sounds a little rudimentary and unnecessary, but maybe not. We'll see. Now, there are a lot of different pencils, types of pencils in the sketching world. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'm just going to do some basic kind of sketching techniques, some ideas that are fundamental to the craft. Tell you a little bit about some sketching references. If you want to pursue this a little more, you can watch as much or little as you want, but I'll talk about that in a second. And then I have, over the years, done a lot of carving, hand carving, caricature stuff, whimsical stuff, a little bit of realistic stuff, in the round, and relief, carving, you name it. And I'll show some examples of that and how having this artistic skill, this disability to draw a little bit, sketch a little bit, can help you with that sort of woodworking, or any woodworking really. Okay, so let's talk about the first part of the presentation, which is really a demonstration. We'll go live here in a minute. I'll get rid of this this slide deck. I still use that term slide deck. That might date me a little bit. Again, what I just said, materials, how to hold a pencil, selecting the pencil that you like the best, and then why you might or might not. Some basic drawing skills, discovery lines, sketching as opposed to, well, anything else. How to make something look like it's round when it's on a flat piece of paper. Yeah. Decomposition. The idea behind sketching is really like it is with a lot of projects. You see something complex and you take it apart and you make small pieces out of it and you try to render those pieces. Decomposition of the subject. And then some practice exercises. And this is something that hopefully you'll like it, because to be proficient, and I'm not talking about being a Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci, but just proficient enough to draw recognizable things, you need to practice. And practice with sketching is a pretty easy thing to do. You can do it anywhere, anytime. And if we have time, I don't know whether we will or not, I really haven't timed this whole thing, and I don't know how many questions we have. I'll do a quick tutorial on some basic rules in proportion in drawing the human face, which is really kind of simple. A couple of different geometrical shapes, a few lines, and you've got a pretty good skeleton for a human face. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's see if we can get this thing working here. I'm gonna. This part of the presentation are just materials. There are some things that, of course, it's just logical. It ought to go without saying, but I'll say it anyway, that you need to sketch. Pencils. Now, there are lots of different kinds of pencils. All of the blue pencils here are artist pencils of some sort. This is just an old-fashioned number 2 pencil, which will do in a pinch, but it's not what I would generally recommend. Some sort of a pencil sharpener, because if you use a fairly soft lead, which you probably will for a lot of sketching, you're going to need to sharpen your pencil frequently. Some sort of eraser, a kneaded eraser like this, or a gum eraser. I personally like the kneaded erasers to pick out things, because you can mold it and get into little cracks and take out pieces of the picture you don't want very easily. A gum eraser is good though for bigger surfaces and if you really want to clean a sketch. So pencils, erasers, pencil sharpeners, and some sort of a sketchbook. That's kind of important. You need to have something to capture your ideas on. So, some of the, and that's it, by the way. That's the basic necessary kit. That is what you need to get started. In addition to that, this is kind of a small version of the foxtail brush that you might use in your shop. Okay. An eraser guard, nice to have. That'll keep you from erasing the things you don't want to erase. Place that over the picture. Straight edges. Now, Okay, so you're a sketch artist, and a sketch artist doesn't need any guides. Well, that's just not true. Um, these will really help you if you really want to make an honest to goodness, for sure, straight line or a bunch of them. This is a little sanding pad that you use if you want to take burrs off the lead of your pencil. If you really get anal about the thing. I have used this once. It's a thing that you get in kits, particularly. And speaking of that, you can buy all of these things, of course, anywhere. Amazon is my go-to place right now, so I don't have to. I love Michael's actually for inexpensive supplies, but I'm not going to go there too often right now. This was a kit, just a simple kit that I got from Amazon. It probably cost, I don't know, $15. A lot of pencils, charcoal. It had erasers. I've taken some things out of it. A thing that I didn't mention, which really comes in handy, and I think I'll show at least one example of this, is a stump, a thing to let you blend those marks that you might make with a graphite pencil that aren't even and make a smooth surface. So you might want an easy way maybe to get at least a good collection of stuff to begin with would be to maybe buy a kit like this, and then you know you have one of everything anyway. Instead the sketchbook, and for years now, I've had some kind of a journal. This is my latest one. And I carry generally a couple of pencils and an eraser in there at least. So that's another thing that you might want to do. This fits nicely into just about any kind of carry luggage or backpack. Okay. What I hope I convinced you of is that although there was a lot of mess on that little table that had my drawing supplies, that's all I ever really would use, and more than what I normally use for these little drawing projects. Normally what I use is one or two artist pencils, an eraser, a stump, and sometimes an eraser guide, and of course my sketch pad. So let's do this. I told you that there are a lot of pencils, and there really are quite a few pencils that you could use. There are really two systems: an American system of pencil numbering, where you have numbers from 1 to 4. We're used to the old number 2 pencils that you always had to use to take tests with. That's the American system. The European system is much bigger. There are 18, 19 different shades of pencils in the European system. If you number, you have two sides to these pencils, these types of pencils, in that on one side you have 9 pencils that are darker. On the other side you have 9 pencils that are lighter. The lighter pencils all have H's in their names. So H 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Here is that's an HB, that's the guy right in the middle. Here is a 2H pencil, for instance. So 9 pencils that are H. H stands for hard, by the way. And those are lighter colored pencils. The shading of the pencil is naturally lighter, and they are harder, the graphite is. On the other side, you have 9 also, but those are 9 softer and darker pencils. So let me give you an idea, and those are numbered also with a letter and a number, B1 through B9, where B9 is the darkest, B1 is the lightest of the dark pencils. And right in the middle, a pencil called HB. So if we started on the darkest, the dark side, here's a, I'll get it somewhere. Here's a 4B. And a 2B, which is a little lighter, but it's kind of hard to see that that's lighter, isn't it? It is to me, anyway. HB, right in the middle. And those might look all very much alike to you. And they do kind of to me, too. But if you go over on the light side, here is a 2H. So I guess the idea, the takeaway from this mini pencil idea is that you've got a lot of choices. What I would suggest that you do is try these pencils. Maybe go ahead and get a kit that has most of them or a lot of them. I feel pretty sure that you're never going to use all of these pencils. People just don't normally switch back and forth. Most people that I know anyway that are sketch artists don't switch back and forth between one shade of pencil and another. Now, it's not to say that you won't do that once or twice, or even several times if a drawing takes a very long time and a lot of detail. But you almost certainly won't use all of these shades. So the idea is to experiment a little bit with these pencils and find the one or ones that make you happy, that make the best image. And whatever that one or those ones are, use those. So let's talk a little bit about grip, how you hold a pencil. There really are two basic grips. You can see my hand. One of them is very much like what you would do if you were writing. But when you write, you hold the pencil down and typically you hold it, or a pen, close to the point. When you sketch, you need to move your hand back. You need the pencil to protrude from your fingers, and you need to then hold it lightly. And as you move across the page, you need to just barely cut, just graze the paper with usually your little finger, possibly the next one. But just the pinky, and that gives you a tactile connection with the page. It's important always to remember that when you draw, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, there's a connection between your eye, your brain, your hand, not just the place where you hold the pencil, but as I just said, where you touch the paper. So that's the writer's grip. Hold pencil loosely. Make your initial lines very light and be loose. Because you'll see the idea behind all of this is that drawing is an iterative process, and you don't want to make lines that are so hard and so dark that you can't go back and change them. Um, there is also, and it looks kind of like this, a thing called an overhand grip, which is exactly what that is. The thumb is up rather than the pencil grip. And this, in fact, you'll see a lot of painters hold their brushes this way, especially when they're working in broad strokes and not close detail. This allows you to make really loose initial strokes, lines with a pencil. There's not much pressure. Don't grip it hard. Don't bear down on it. There's not much pressure between the lead and the pencil. So that is the overhand stroke. And, you know, if you find some other way to hold this pencil that feels comfortable to you and you can make light, well-controlled lines, do it. These are just two things that two strokes that people use, two grips. Okay. So there's some basic tool and pencil kinds of information. Let's talk about another fundamental skill that needs to be learned with drawing. Now, an exercise that I think I had in probably the first drawing class or art class that I ever took it was in college. It was an elective. They ask you to look at the subject that you were drawing, hold your pencil on the paper, and never lift it from the paper, and never look at what you're drawing. Well, that can result in some amazing things. Usually nothing that looks like whatever it was the subject you were looking at. So sketching actually is a process of drawing small lines. We're going to think circle here. Now you'll have to forgive me. I am not used to drawing from the side this way. This is very difficult for me. So my perfect circles are not going to be perfect circles. I don't know whether you can see this or not, but if you can't, that's fine because it's supposed to be very light lines. These are discovery lines rather than doing what I just described. And I'm even going to watch myself draw this time and try to draw the perfect circle with one hard line, which actually I didn't do a bad job there, but normally that doesn't work too well. What I'm going to do is make these light lines, and this is what you should do, and then look at the lines that are the best path for whatever figure this is. Now I'm drawing the ubiquitous circle. You know, drawing, some people say, is only made up of about 3 or possibly 4 different shapes. This is one of them, and this is fundamental, the circle, the oval. So now I've drawn my discovery lines, are sketchy, and then I'd come back around and made them a little darker. And if I need to clean that up, there's also the eraser. The eraser is absolutely a sketch tool. It can be just as important as a pencil. All righty. Now this circle is just that, a flat circle. What we'd like to do, this is not very realistic, what we'd like to do is make this into something that looks more spherical, something that has body, form, shape. So when you do that with a circle, or usually with a cylinder, anything that's rounded, you need to consider the source of light. Oh, because we're going to make this form, this shape, three-dimensional by adding shading to it. And shading must be rational. It's got to agree with what our brain thinks shading should be. So if the light is coming from here, from the left, the upper left, then you're going to have dark places on the lower right-hand side. We have a little shading there. That's probably not enough. You can continue to do this. One thing you might want to notice too is that I'm trying to make my shading curved with the same curvature as the sphere, the circle. That's kind of the way it's supposed to look. That's natural. Our eyes and brain interpreting what the eyes pull in, that's exactly what it wants to see. So now we have, rather than a circle, we have a sphere. So that's one of the fundamental shapes that that you need to use, you will use over and over again in drawing. Another one is a square or a rectangle. Well, if you look at a cube, a box, straight on, this is what you see. A four-sided thing that's flat. How do we make this square, flat square, have shape? Well, we just extend parallel lines from three corners. By the way, this is a way that this can be done. We'll talk a little bit about perspective, and that's really what we're doing right now. So now we have a cube, and it feels like it has shape. You also, as a woodworker, could make this into a frame for a cabinet. If you take some of the connecting lines off, you have a table or the bottom of a chair. These are very fun, again, these are very fundamental shapes, and we'll talk in just a minute about decomposition. These are the things that you decompose these bigger pictures to. Kind of like a complex project, taking it apart into small steps, right? We take the picture apart into small pieces and try to render those pieces. So there's our cube. If we wanted to give it a little shading, we could do that. The light comes from this side. Let's say it's coming from the right side and high. So we probably got, and from the rear. So this is bright and sunny over here. I'll take that line out right now. Take all those lines out. But we get some shading in here. Now we're starting to add shading to this form to make it look more dimensional. You won't see much shading anywhere else around this box because the light is coming from here. You make it a little bit over here. If it's really come from the back, you'll get a lot over here. Of course, you'll have the shadow around. I'll stop right here for 1 second and see if there are any questions. I guess a big question is, can you actually see these shapes? Or am I drawing something that really is visible?
We can see.
Yeah, they are visible for me.
Okay.
I do have a question, Terry, and that is that are some papers better than others for sketching?
Yeah, I personally, and I think this is, well, This really depends. But personally, I like something with a little bit of a little bit of texture to it. This is fairly smooth paper. I can't remember what the weight is, to tell you the truth, but it's not very heavy paper. But unlike something like a watercolor, you don't want a really rough surface. But I do like, personally, I like a little bit of a grain. I believe, for instance, this pad is a little bit coarser, the paper, than this one. For sketching, smooth paper is fine. If you want to save a little bit of money and you want to do a lot of quick sketching, you might even get something like big newsprint pads, which are relatively inexpensive, and you can afford to buy one in the size of like 2 feet by 3 feet for a reasonable amount of money.
Maybe the question is, do some type of papers erase more easily than others?
Well, yeah, this is not really coarse paper. I'm not sure I have one. I have a really smooth surface over there. Let's see, hang on a second. Okay, so anything in most of these pads will say sketch pad. Anything that says sketch pad is a fairly good bet that you can erase it and erase it well. So for instance, this, I could pick out a portion of that shadow from that box pretty easily, and it pretty much disappears. Any paper, it really doesn't matter, any paper that you use, this will smudge after a while. You have to be very careful, and you'll see a lot of sketch artists will make stencils and transfer a picture several times before they get a finished picture, just because there's so much trash around the on the paper. So to complete, another thought here, to complete this idea on shading, which we're talking about, I think you can understand just kind of rubbing the graphite, and I'm using the edge, not the point, but the edge of the lead to make the shading. You can also do something called cross-hatching. Are those lines showing up well or at all? Let's make them a little darker.
I don't see them at all.
Here?
Now they're showing up.
Okay. So cross-hatching is, you'll see this used a lot with in graphics art, and historically it was used extensively for block prints. One of the ways to get a shade rather than full black or full white is this cross-hatching, because then what would appear on the paper that the block was being printed on were the lines. And if you made the lines closer together, the closer you made the lines, the darker it appeared. So by scratching the surface of the plate, many times you could make a darker shade. So you'd see, you know, the famous, some of the famous block prints from people like Duryea use this kind of technique, and some people still do. A third kind of shading that is not one I would ever do, but some people have, and I don't know whether it's an academic exercise or it's real, or they just happen to like making dots. But this kind of a pointillist, and that is actually a word, this pointillist technique, making points that are closer or further apart. And there certainly are some painters who did that too, who are very famous. So you have this kind of shading where you really use the graphite extensively. You can also shade with cross-hatching, or you can use this pointillist kind of technique. So we have a square, we have a sphere now, a cylinder, shows some volume. It has shape and form. But if you wanted to improve that a little bit, you can certainly shade it, pretend that the light source is coming from the upper left, and now you have an object. And the final one that you'll use quite a bit is a triangle. And a triangle can become a pyramid fairly easily, and you can also give it a feeling of a little more depth with shadows and shade. Okay. There's one more idea that I'll give you, just because it's I think it's important for perspective and drawing. It's the idea of the vanishing point. Now that sounds like it might be a little difficult, but let's start with a square, and let's say that that square is going to be a house. And you have to bear with my simplistic stylized rendering of this house, because that's not the point I'm trying to get across here. But there's the front of the house. And if you were standing right there in front of it, you might be in a position where you could not see anything else. But I'm going to make these perspective lines. This is a one-point perspective. The lines are going from the object to a single point. That point is called the vanishing point. It is the place on the horizon where if this house went on forever, it would disappear, sort of. So there's our house. Now, if I draw a line that's parallel to that front line on the front of the house, another line that's parallel to that top line on the top of the house, I now have a very flat roofed house. It definitely has some appearance or feel of volume, size, and shape. If I want to give him a simple roof, I can find the center point of that top line of the house, take that straight up, and make two triangles. And there is the front of the roof. Now, if I take that point of the front of the roof, back to the vanishing point. I now have the roof line that I can finish on the back of the house. Now, when I erase all those other lines, if I was doing this for a sketch, those lines would be very faint. And you'll also find that over time, you may not even need those lines as a guide. You'll just have the right feel for making the form of the house. What's cool about this is that if I wanted this to be a neighborhood with a row of houses, I can just add more houses. Oops. There's the roof line, there's the house, and so on. All the way back until they disappear into the horizon. That is a single vanishing point. You might want to look also at something called a two-point perspective, which would allow you to draw a building, let's say, as if you were looking at the building from the corner straight on. In that case, for this two-point perspective, I would have a point here, possibly, and a point over here. Like so, with the building in the middle. This is pretty good for making towers, let's say, or big buildings, and showing a little different, maybe more realistic, I don't know, perspective. Forget that line. That one's almost right. Okay. I'm sure you've probably seen these things or have been introduced to them in some way or another. Maybe you haven't. Are there any questions right now? No. I'll take that as a no. All right. So we've had our basic kind of fundamental shapes. And if just about, well, not anything, many things that you see, especially man-made things that have hard lines, but even things in the natural world can be expressed with a combination of these shapes. Look at a picture like that. Does that show?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
Okay. You'll see in this building, most of the points represented in the man-made world that we just talked about. There are triangles with shadows. Here are rectangles and arcs of a circle. Here, going back on the building, is a vanishing point, a perspective, the corner of the building. Here's a large flat rectangle. So you'll see things like this, I think, and you could take, and what I would suggest is, if you do want to learn how to draw, find a picture like this and take parts of it out and just draw those parts and draw them as well as you can. For instance, draw this corner. draw this piece of the building, draw this tower. Start with if you want to do something more ambitious, draw this whole building as a large block and then add parts and lines to it, subdivide it. That's it, the whole idea behind decomposition, I think. Here's a simple illustration of that. Here is a cylinder, kind of a squatty cylinder. But if I add a little arc onto the side, I've made that cylinder a cup. And if I put a little bit of dark shadow in that, and maybe a couple of lines coming out, I fill that cup up. So, cylinder, arc.
Terry,
Yes, ma'am?
I find perspective in drawing buildings one of the most challenging things about sketching. I know a lot of people see it automatically. They just, you know, they can follow a roof line, find the vanishing point. I don't know, maybe it has something to do with my prescription, but I don't see it very well. So I liked your explanation and breaking that apart. That was helpful.
Well, thank you. If you, one of the exercises that I've done and I like doing is, and I kind of implied that this was the thing you could do, is to make a neighborhood. You start with one house on a corner and go down in both directions with a sidewalk, use vanishing points on either side, and fill in a few more houses, and then make those unique. But you do it one step, one very small step at a time, because each house starts as a basic cube or rectangular prism and then evolves with features. I think the problem that, and maybe after a while you just kind of feel this and it comes together, but the problem that most beginning sketch artists have is that they want to do it all at once. And you can't, and maybe there are definitely some people who can do that and do it well. And people who have practiced and practiced and practiced make it seem that they're doing that, but in their mind, they're still composing that picture normally with parts. So that's a pretty important thing. Something that I've found that helps me is doodling. I've always doodled. Here's a little doodle exercise that's structured. The first one, and I would suggest you might want to do this. It's a way to loosen up and get ready to draw. But the first one is called rays. Just make a dot, that's R-A-Y-S, and draw lines from the dot. Try to make the lines about the same length. There are no prizes given for how pretty or ugly it is. It should be an exercise to make you feel good because you control the pencil and you just keep doing them until you're happy. Now, those rays might make you happy. They make me happy. Another exercise, and you can do this right on top of these rays, is our circle. Be loose. Don't worry about making multiple lines. Go round and round until you've made your perfect circle. By the way, I apologize, but again, drawing from the side like this, I've found that my circles turn into ellipses. I can't do anything about it. Or if you just want to do something else, connect the rays with lines. That was a bad one. To make something that looks maybe like a spider web. That's what I would think. Anyway. I typically, before I start drawing something, I'll pretty much draw random lines. And sometimes I actually come up with a shape that I think would be fun to draw, and I'll develop it. But at any rate, the rays and circles thing is a good way to loosen up. When you practice, and you definitely need to practice, start simple and build up. Take a bowl. A bowl is really just circles and spheres. And maybe you want to put something in it. It's still life. More circles. The important thing, I think, is to do something. And whatever you do initially is probably, unless again you're one of those prodigies, is probably not going to be particularly realistic. Care more, pay more attention to proportion and relative size at first, less attention to detail. Get something on paper that is about the same mass as the thing you're looking at. Then try to break that down into pieces and add the detail. If the size and proportions of this thing that you draw first are correct, then it's fairly easy to add the details. An example of that would be, this is a little too darker than I would make it, would be a face, let's say. You make a sphere, draw a line down the middle, add an ellipse to that, connect it about midway up on this sphere. The bottom part of this ellipse, or this ellipse, the bottom part of the face that this is going to be, is about 2/3 the size of the top. Now, divide that entire thing in half, and you have
Anxious for the bell.
the eye line.
Oh, he's making a face now.
Divide that in half, and you have where the tip of the nose should go.
Watercolor class or an 8th grade art. Right.
Divide that in half,
It's not.
and you have the lips.
I'm just gonna walk down there and look at
Now,
the chatting.
you can add these features now that you have a well-proportioned figure to work with. You can add these features, and at least you know initially that they're going to be in the right position on the face. looks kind of funny, but that formula works pretty well for the perfect human face. Let's say you're doing caricatures, though, you probably want your nose line to be longer, your nose to be wider than the perfect one. Maybe your eyes are smaller, but you have a place to start. And that's a start. I would recommend too that if you're interested in doing any kind of thing, work with human faces, particularly carving, that you either take a course or look on YouTube and take a course for free. I've seen some of the best, absolutely some of the best instruction around out there for free. Okay. I could talk a whole lot more, but I'm not, because I think we're running out of time, or I don't know, Larry, how do people feel?
I would suggest just keep going. The protocol, the nice thing about Zoom meetings is you can just leave if you're bored, if you want, you got to go, whatever. So yeah, I think there's enough people that would like to go a bit more depth. So I would say, if you've got 15 minutes, take 15 minutes.
Okay.
Normally the SIG goes for 2 hours.
Oh,
And
okay.
so, people may or may not have the stamina to do that or the interest, but, that's the beauty of the online forum. We can just kind of disappear if we want. And if we're talking to ourselves, then we know.
Okay. So all these, what's really cool about natural figures, particularly animals, and this is not just true of humans and the human face, but everything in the natural world, there are proportions that you can follow. And those proportions, because human faces have been done so frequently, those proportions are well known. And again, for the ideal or normal human face, they don't vary. The eyes, for instance, are about a little more than 1/5 of the distance across the head, the skull at this point, each one of the two eyes. The distance between the two eyes is the same as each eye. So again, if you start, and I'm really marking this with heavy marks, you would do this much lighter. But you could actually, if this is one of your first faces, you could actually set this up with very light tick marks to mark these positions out. You have the eyes, the eyebrows, of course, are right above the eyes, and well, you get a lot of leeway with that, but you want big eyebrows, run them all the way from, or it could be a unibrow, run them all the way from the middle out to the side, but typically they're just a little bigger than the eye. That depends on a lot of things, though. That's the normal. That's the ideal. The nose, this would be the tip of the nose, will go to the ideal. Straight down from the corner of the eyes would be the width of the nose. Now, in caricature art, when I do something, and that's a lot of what I do, most of what I do with carving, that nose is either going to be very long, much longer than this, or shorter and really wide. And you do that on purpose. The eyes will either be much larger for, say, a fairy wave kind of creature, or much smaller for an ogre. So, the lip will be just above that bottom line, and this would be the upper lip, and go down to about the midpoint of the eye. If you drew a line straight down from the pupil of the eye, that's where the corners of the mouth should go. And then just bring up, round out the bottom, and put a little bit of a round chin mark. So the chin's down here. So now we've got the eyes, the eyebrows, the nose, the mouth, the chin. Go back and adjust the face a little bit. Bring it in at the temples to give a cheekbone. Round it around the cheeks a little bit. And again, this depends on what you're doing. You could make this a very long, lean face if it were a wizard, for instance. It would have a little more pointed chin if it was a fairy princess. And finally, the ears, somewhere between the eye and the eyebrow is the top of the ear, and then it goes down. Oops. Goes down to somewhere around the nose. And that depends. Again, if I'm doing a caricature, I might want a very big ear. And finally, the hairline, the little part is there. Now, I don't know, I did that again sideways. I don't think I practiced quite enough drawing sideways, but that is a face. And I typically will draw a lot of faces before I carve a new one, or if it's something special. But typically when I carve the face, I just use these lines that go down, only the lines, the cross lines in the face, and then just lightly draw in once I clean the wood where the features should go. Let me show you quickly how this is applied to several pieces that I've carved, where I've used this art and where I haven't. To do that, I'll give you a lot clearer picture right now, but I have to go back to the presentation, so it'll take me 1 second, but at least it'll show up very clearly on your screens. Let's see. Okay. Here. And okay, we'll talk about this a little bit, and if you would, if you want this presentation, I'll be more than happy to share it with anybody who wants it. I found a very good beginning sketch course on YouTube with 11 lessons that totaled, at least a couple of hours of work and some very good exercises. You might want to look at it. This is the link. And it's maybe not the best course in the world, but it is good, it's free, and it's very logical. So, now, if you want to draw something, and I did this, I typed in draw food dogs on Google, and I found several really great food dog drawing YouTubes. couple of things that I use. I've gotten Wood Carving Illustrated magazine for years and years. It has a lot of simple stuff in it, but it also occasionally has a gem of an idea and a whole lot of free step-by-step carving guides. Fox Chapel Publishing has, I think, some of the best. I assume it's okay to do this, Larry. I don't know. But I use these, and I use them a lot.
Oh, for sure. Go
There are
for
a
it.
lot more out there, but these guys carry a whole bunch, and they're sold both from Fox Chapel and Amazon, and I found they're usually a teeny bit cheaper on Amazon than they are directly from the publisher, Fox Chapel. So, those are some references I thought I would give you. Okay, so let me show you some things that I've used this stuff for. I think Larry mentioned this earlier. Mary May, I believe, is going to teach a course in acanthus leaf carving. Well, this guy, the first one, the Green Man of Ewas, is an acanthus leaf green man. Second one was kind of unique. I wanted to show you that. The third is a block printing that I did, and I definitely used original art for that. And the third is a chainsaw carving that I did, and I used a little sketch art with that too. So that's good. Look at this. This was a picture that I found, and it was actually in one of those Fox Chapel books, and it was a book on green men. And they had, oh my gosh, 200 images of green men. This guy actually exists. The original carving is English. I didn't draw this originally, and I did just trace it. That was it. So I didn't use much of my artist abilities on this. But I did find, you'll find that when you carve, your drawing, your nice, neat initial drawing goes away, and you have to keep replacing it, or I do anyway, sometimes. So in that third picture, that's it's a big flat piece of basswood that I used. Transferred the image to it through carbon paper and cut that on a bandsaw. It was pretty tricky bandsaw work, not the trickiest I've done, but it was interesting for sure. I typically, when I carve these, I'll start at the top or the bottom and work my way to the other end. And that's exactly what I did with this one. And the other tricky thing with these green men is that they are covered, the face is covered with leaves. So the leaves are in different layers, and you have to carve layers. Just going through the process of carving that, I used to get off the wood to get the wood off a little more quickly. I used some power tools on this initially. I used a flex shaft device with a reciprocating attachment, and put a really big gouge on the end, a flat sweep gouge on the end of that, and to get a lot of the wood off. So that's my acanthus leaf carving. This, on the other hand, is an oak leaf guy. Jack of the Green, another picture from this book, and a green man from England. The different technique that I used here, and I had to work a little bit on the art myself, was that I layered the final piece. So I had essentially a piece in front and another piece underneath it that was larger, which shows in this third picture. Cut those separately. They're both full flat pieces of basswood. Traced them and cut them, and then carved them separately, and finally assembled at the very end. So you have a really extraordinary depth for a. There's so much depth. It's almost not a bas relief carving. And that's what it looked like to end with. You see that on the picture on the left-hand side. You'll see the tool that I use. It's just a, typical Fordham drum flex shaft tool with a reciprocating attachment and a pretty wide, in this case, actually a pretty deep sweep too, but a big one. It helped a lot. My failure, and I did have a big failure with this one, was that I didn't carve the leaves on the bottom layer down low enough or give them quite enough curvature. Face I was okay with. Face I actually changed from the original altogether because I liked this face better. I wanted him to look a little severe, maybe a little scary. This one, I wanted to do a block print, and I just cast around for an idea, and I decided at the time I was doing a lot of dragons, so I decided a dragon thing would be fun. So some of the best silhouette kind of artwork that I found was in tattoo flash sites. So all of these dragons were from a tattoo site. And I found one, it was the one on the top right that I kind of liked. And I did go on and adapt that and redraw the dragon. And if you look at the picture number 2 that says transfer pattern and carve block, that the pink thing is a linoleum block that I just carved out. The dark parts of that block is what was inked. And then I just transferred that impression to the paper. So that's my first and only block print, but I had a lot of fun and I enjoyed it, and it was really, really cool. I would like to do more someday. Any questions? Okay, here's I did a wood sprite on a log. This was my first or second log carving. The picture on the right was the one that I started with. This is kind of a pan Bacchus sort of guy, kind of happy and half in his cups. The picture in the middle, those are logs that I picked up on the side of the road in Florida after the hurricane, the last hurricane we had. Now, hurricanes are not good things, but for a wood carver, sometimes it truly is a windfall. That's pun intended. The picture on the right is my arm. When I cleaned those logs, I should have worn a hazmat suit. Those were some of the dirtiest pieces of wood I've ever done anything with. And I didn't realize they were going to be quite so messy. That was all the garbage that came off the logs when I was trying to clean them up to carve them. This is the guy, and you can see, I didn't transfer that drawing, I just drew it. What I did was take the small picture, impose a grid over that picture, and then you don't see it here, but I drew grid pencil lines on this log. And then I transferred the pieces of it. That's a different kind of decomposition. I didn't have to draw the whole picture at once. If I was a really good artist, I would have just sketched that whole thing out from scratch. But I used that grid technique to transfer the small picture. The first picture to the left, just made some initial deep cuts for the nose line, the eyes, the pits, the sockets of the eyes where the eye is recessed, and then below the leaves and above the brow, and then all around the edge of the face. So this is a very large and unusual relief picture. This was not a relief carving. This was not a carving in the round. This was definitely a relief carving. The next picture is just more development, more detail. The final one, or the third one over, more detail. This one, I was done carving, but I wanted to bring out some features more, so I use stains. And I don't normally use stains on any of my wood carvings, but I did on this one. And the final one on the right is the finished product. That was my shop in Florida, by the way. I tried to replicate it here, but my shop here is not quite as big. Okay, so those were examples of flat-ish kind of carvings, almost relief carvings, some cases really relief carvings. I also have carved a lot of things in the round, mostly smaller things, nothing big. And I'll give you an example of that. Now, this art those are not things that I've drawn, although while I was carving the lions this came out of a whole group of carvings that I did and am still doing for Noah's Ark. Here's the lions. I started drawing lions from different perspectives myself. I found that if I draw a picture from different positions, different perspectives, that I'm able to carve a lot better once I get to in 3 dimensions, once I get to that. So the next picture just shows a bunch of tracings that I used to transfer to the wood, which is in the last picture. And from that, I cut a lot. Actually, I've cut a whole bunch of these animals out, and they're all out in the shop right now, waiting to be carved. A lot more than haven't been carved. On the left, that piece in the back with the green circle around it was the lion. There are 2 lions, the male and the female. And the final picture on the right was the lion once I'd finished it. Now, this has nothing to do with sketching, but with carving in the round, especially small pieces, you have to be very careful about the grain. In this case, I chose the wrong direction of the grain. I think I was probably trying to save wood. And I actually cut this thing so that the grain ran across the legs rather than with the legs. So the legs are the thinnest part of the carving. So what happened? I had 2 legs that broke. This poor lion was reassembled at least once. And I had to carve the bottom part of the leg separately from the upper part of the leg. Bad planning on my part. If I'd run the grain in the right direction, those would have never broken, and the middle won't break. It didn't need to have that kind of attention to grain. So, my bad, my mistake. This is a different one. This is years ago and this was, gosh, maybe when the Harry Potter movies and the Lord of the Rings movies started coming out. I've always been a fantasy fan anyway. I wanted to do a 3-dimensional thing to carve it, and I wanted it to be something whimsical and fantastic. So I chose an ogre. So the little doodles on the left are one of many pages of doodles that I did for this guy until I finally hit on the one that I wanted to use. If you look at the one at the top right, it's very similar to the what it ended up being. So this was one of the last pages that I did. On the top right is the sketch that I made, both frontal and side. And the red lines that run down the arms and the middle, I added because I wanted to make an armature for a clay model. This was the first big in the round kind of carving that I had done. And I wanted to try that. So the gray thing on the dark gray thing on the left-hand side was the clay model that I built. Kind of clunky, but that's what it was. The picture in the middle was the wood block once I'd roughed it out a little bit. I made a mark on my slide. How did I do that? Lovely. This was poplar. I usually use basswood, but I wanted to try poplar, and it was okay. It's not the easiest wood to work. It's not nearly as well behaved as basswood is. And then finally on the right was the ogre. Now I thought he ended up a little cartoonish. I had to make really big feet too, or he wouldn't have stood up. And I also had to reposition the club to come out front as a third touch point and to balance him to keep him from falling over on his butt. And that is it. That's all I have. So, things that I have done with art over the years. I had some drawings too and paintings that I thought I might show, but one project that I'm working on now that might be of interest are food dogs. I mentioned that. I found a YouTube on food dogs. I'm going to carve 2 medium-sized food dogs out of some walnut that was a big tree that fell down in front of my son-in-law's house. He had to get it removed, and he's not much of a woodworker. So I've got a bunch of walnut logs, and I want to make a couple of food dogs. I know furniture makers or even turners would probably say, well, that's a waste of a good walnut, but we'll see. I thought the grain would look right really well if I finished it right. All right, guys. Larry, I'm pretty much done with what the material I had.
So what